Game balance is hard, and the past 17 years of TF2 patches certainly proves that. Of the 135 unlockable weapons in TF2 excluding reskins, only 19 have remained unchanged from when they were first added, and I think the stats on which classes have the most unchanged weapons might shock you. For some criteria, stock weapons will be excluded, as I see these as more of a baseline for the class and less of a weapon per se. And on that same note, class-wide or game-wide changes such as a tough break update to all flamethrowers that grants you 20 HP for extinguishing teammates won't count. Of the 9 classes, Spy is the only one whose unlockable weapons have all experienced changes at some point. This shouldn't really come as a shock to anyone since Spy is a class that is most unique to the genre of shooting games and has been an absolute balancing nightmare for Valve. 4 of the 9 classes have only had one weapon unlock that has never been changed. The first class is Engineer with the Frontier Justice. Now, the Frontier Justice is where some nuance is needed. The only change that has ever been made to the Frontier Justice is capping the amount of revenge crits you can accumulate in one life to 35. I would argue this change isn't significant enough to be counted, but I can see the argument if you think otherwise. Next is Soldier and Demoman, who both share one of these, being the Pain Train. The Pain Train is one of the more underwhelming unlocks in TF2, a weapon of all time as some people may call it. It's a product of a bygone era where every weapon unlock just had one upside and one downside, and for the Pain Train, nothing about it ever warranted change. The Pain Train isn't bad, but just kinda pointless. Its upside only comes into fruition when on the attacking side of game modes that support it, and while the 10% damage vulnerability isn't egregious, it's not very fun to have either. Despite that, the weapon is really fine as it is right now. There's nothing wrong with the weapon being niche, and the backcapping capabilities of it are fun. Next for classes with only one single unchanged weapon is Medic with the Uber Saw. Since day one, it has always granted 25% Uber charge on a swing in exchange for a slower firing speed. It's pretty surprising how this thing has never been changed given that it is near unanimously used by every Medic player. Most of Medic's other melees are fine, so it is clear that giving 25% Uber on a swing is simply too much. All I think this weapon really needs is to have its Uber on hit toned down to something like 15%, and then I think it would be good. Unlike usual Valve tradition, we are skipping classes with 2 change unlocks because there are none, and going straight to the classes with 3, which are Scout and Heavy. The Backscatter, often considered to be one of the worst scattergun unlocks, has never been changed since its release in 2014. It does exactly what it says in the package, extra damage when hitting it from behind, but in return, you get more bullet spread and a smaller clip. While these aren't necessarily debilitating downsides, the weapon's upside is woefully inadequate to counterbalance them. The only novel damage breakpoint the Backscatter enables is the ability to one-shot light classes, but due to the increased bullet spread, you need to be really close to the point where your enemy has to be entirely unaware of your presence to make use of it, basically making it pointless. This weapon for sure needs change. Next up is the Boston Basher. No qualms about this one, it's a perfectly balanced unlock that has its merits, securing its spot as a go-to damage-oriented melee for Scout. And finally is a Candy Cane. While its 25% explosive damage vulnerability is quite punishing, I really don't think this weapon is bad or even needs to be changed. This is my Scout melee of choice and it's really refreshing to use over the usual picks like the Atomizer or Rap Assassin. It encourages good movement and positioning and sort of acts as a healthy training weight for those trying to better their movement. For Heavy, the first of his unchanged unlocks is the second Banana. Nothing to say here, it's just a stat change on the sandwich that provides a nice alternative for more selfish playstyles. Next is the Killing Gloves of Boxing, which was among one of the 3 weapons that were Heavy's first unlocks, and to this day, the gloves have not been changed at all. They are relatively unproblematic, though it could be annoying to get mowed down by a Heavy with crits because your free-to-play teammate fed him an easy melee kill. Finally, for Heavy unlocks is the Holiday Punch. While it might seem broken on paper to be able to stun Ubered players in place, it's tied to a melee on the slowest class in the game, so it's fine as is. But what isn't fine is that 99% of my viewers aren't subscribed, so subscribe to change that. No pressure though. For classes with 4 unchanged unlocks, there is Pyro. And funnily enough, they're all melee unlocks, with the first of which being the Sharpened Volcano Fragment. Despite being one of the coolest looking weapons in the game, this thing just sucks. Giving Pyro the ability to light people on fire from a melee attack is pretty redundant. The entire class is already centered around igniting people. This weapon just needs a rework, plain and simple. One of the more creative I have seen is to turn it into a Market Gardener, allowing it to crit from reflected blast jumps and jetpack jumps. I think criticals and detonator jumps would be too broken, so while the use case of a Pyro Market Gardener is really niche, anything is better than what we have right now. Next is the Third Degree, the quote-unquote only straight upgrade in all of TF2. This weapon is very niche and its efficacy hinges on whether or not random crits are enabled. Despite that, the weapon is fine as is. It has a small cult following and I can appreciate that. After that, there is the Back Scratcher, which is a perfectly fine unlock. While it may not be as universally applicable as the Extinguisher or Power Jack, it has its role. As much as I hate the word roamer, that is just a perfect way to describe the Back Scratcher playstyle. Ditch the medic and embrace the health packs. Finally, there's the Hot Hand. I can see why Valve left this one unchanged despite how god-awful it is. The other Jungle Inferno unlocks are relatively radical in terms of how they changed Pyro's playstyle, and those needed to be ironed out first. I'm sure Valve would have eventually gotten to the Hot Hand if they just kept pushing out balance changes past Blue Moon, but for now, it just remains as a stupid meme weapon for people who are bored out of their minds. For the mathematicians out there who kept count, this means that there is only one more class to discuss, which is Sniper, with a grand total of 6 unlocks that have never been changed. Well, 5, it depends on how you count the Huntsman, or 4, depending on how you count the Girardi, but we'll get to that. In 2010, the mechanics of the Huntsman were changed to allow you to charge it while jumping. This change really skirts the line and I'm not really sure how I should count it. If you disagree, then feel free to eviscerate me in the comments. Next is a classic. While this weapon is undeniably shit, I still don't want it to be changed. There is nothing more satisfying than hitting a 450 damage no-scope onto someone from across the map while you watch them explode into a million pieces. The weapon was added as a nod to Team Fortress Classic, and that is why, despite being undeniably horrific for the past decade, Valve never touched it. Keeping on with the rifle unlocks is a machina. This thing needs a rework. Nothing about it is objectively bad, but as of now, it just serves as a Sydney sleeper that headshots. By that, I mean that the rifle awards suboptimal gameplay for going for body shots as opposed for headshots. Can you tell I'm a brain dead sniper main yet? If you disagree with this, there is no denying that Sniper as a whole needs to be rebalanced, and one of the most popular ideas to rebalance him is to add tracers to all of his rifles. So if by some miracle Valve starts rebalancing TF2 again and gives Sniper tracers, the Machina will definitely need a rework. And last for the rifles is the Hitman's Heatmaker, or sort of sniper rifle of all time. Its only downside is less body shot damage, which really isn't a big deal, but the upside isn't all that great either. You could even argue that the focus mechanic is a downside because of the tracer rounds. This is another rifle that just needs a rework, but I have no idea how to approach it. At least it sounds really cool though. Another one of Sniper's unlocks that skirts the line is Girardi. The only change Girardi has ever received was granting a 20% reduction in cooldown for extinguishing teammates, but this attribute was also given to the Mad Milk, so I see it as more of a game-wide addition to throwables, as opposed to a change solely for Girardi. Finally, there is the Shahansha, my personal favorite sniper melee. I think the Shahansha is just the ideal version of the Bushwhacker. It has the same potential to deal massive damage and potentially save a sniper in melee range while not also being a straight up get out of jail free card. If you use this weapon, you are cultured. So looking at the overall results, I find it interesting how the two most fundamentally broken and hated classes in the game are the two that have had the least change unlocks, but probably the most egregious of these is the Ubersaw. It is really a shame that Medic has so many cool melees that all just get shoved aside because the Ubersaw is so overtuned. Subscribe and check out my other channel or the other videos on your screen now.